Send this bill to the House.
The question is that the motion be agreed to. The Honourable Mary Ann Street.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Ngā iwi o Ngati apa, tēnei te mihi kia koutou, tēnā koutou, kia ora koutou katoa. It gives me great pleasure to rise to speak to this third and final reading of this bill that has been a long time in the making. I want to pay my respects to the tupuna and the leaders of Ngati apa who have gone before and who have not lived to see this day. I pay my respects also to those who have carried their torch faithfully. The young people whom the Minister has just named in her kōrero, who now have brought this settlement to fruition. And I pay my respects to you also. I think this is a striking element of this particular settlement, that we have the emergence of a generation of young leaders who are now more than well equipped to settle a grievance of long standing. I recognise that, and I recognise the people who have gone before you, because they are the ones who have prepared you and equipped you for this task. And I hope today that in fact the government does put the seal with this third reading on something that should have been honoured a long time ago, as the Minister has said. I want to make a couple of points about the legislation, and I want to refer to a few things that one of my colleagues has said earlier in his first speech, I think, in addressing the first reading of this legislation when it came to the House. And my colleague, the Honourable Mita Ririnui, had this to say about this legislation. He said that Ngati apa entered into a process which basically began with the signing of the Treaty of Waitangi for a simple purpose. They encouraged settlement, but at the same time they wanted to be recipients. They wanted to be in the position where they could benefit from much of the technology brought here by the settlers. So they entered into many discussions with Crown agents, many of whom are mentioned in the preamble to this bill. Certainly they are mentioned in the historical account. But that did not happen. In fact, Ngati apa went through a process of being subjected to land confiscation and land acquisition to the point where they were left with simply 1% of their original land holding. For them, that had a tremendous impact. It led to the undermining of their culture, the loss of their language, and the fragmentation of whānau, hapu and iwi, to the extent that they did not participate in the development of the Rangitike area. In fact, they were what we might call onlookers. The development of that area was undertaken at their expense, and they at no time were able to participate in it. Mr. Speaker, the history of this settlement is painful to read, and it is good that it is traversed in some detail in the beginning of this piece of legislation. So it is written down in our law for all to read that the land confiscation, the alienation, the oppression of Ngati apa, which deprived them of economic well-being as well as spiritual and physical well-being, can be referred back to by anybody who cares to look, because it will now enter our statute. From a brief traversing of the history, and by reference to my colleague Mita Ririnui's words, but also in recognition of the words that the Minister spoke a few minutes ago, the next step to come to in the legislation is the apology, because the first thing that must happen in order for a settlement to be a settlement of a grievance is an apology. There is no settlement without the apology. And I want to quote from the text of the apology in the bill. It says this: "The Crown recognises the efforts and struggles of the ancestors of Ngati Apa North Island in pursuit of their claims for justice and redress from the Crown, and makes this apology to Ngati Apa North Island and their descendants. The Crown profoundly regrets and unreservedly apologises to Ngati Apa for the breaches of the Treaty of Waitangi and its principles acknowledged above. The Crown regrets and apologises for the cumulative effect of its actions and omissions over the generations to the present day, which have had a detrimental impact on the traditional tribal structures of Ngati Apa, their access to customary resources and significant sites, economic and social development, and their physical, cultural and spiritual well-being. Accordingly, with this apology, the Crown seeks to atone for its past wrongs, begin the process of healing, and make a significant step towards rebuilding a lasting relationship based on mutual trust and cooperation with Ngati Apa. If I say nothing else in this speech tonight, Mr. Speaker, the text of that apology is sufficient to begin a settlement process. Also within this legislation are the other elements of a settlement process with which we are now familiar. There is the cultural redress. There is the compensation and the return of lands. All of those elements are prerequisites for New Zealand Aotearoa to begin to move forward as people who work with each other, treat with each other in a way that is respectful and equal. And we can start to build a different society on that basis. Mr. Speaker, it's my great pleasure to commend this third reading of the Ngati Apa Settlement Bill to the House. Kia ora.